Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of non-believer who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. So, Pops, it's our second episode in our series on education.
It is. And, the first sort of Franken episode aside, I think it's going okay.
It's going all right. So this episode, we're going to be discussing evolution. And I'm curious, you suggested the topic. So is there a reason that you think evolution is such an important topic when it comes to kids' education?
I think for some kids more than others, I think for just in general, it's good to at least recognize that it's a heavily evidenced scientific theory. But it's important to remember that, it's not a theory, lowercase t, colloquially, like, oh, I got a theory that, my uncle's gonna be making moonshine this year because he made moonshine last year or whatever. It's capital T theory, meaning that it's a hypothesis that graduated to something that you can use as a model to predict behaviors in the natural world. It got its degree. You know what I mean? So it's important to recognize that it is very heavily evidenced, let's just say mildly, across so many fields of scientific study, including geology and paleontology and, all forms of biology and virology. And, you see this process. And unless you take the literal word of a holy book as your origin of life or proposed origin of life, you're not fundamentally at odds with evolution. I know plenty of Christians, and in fact, Francis Collins, who was one of the leaders of the Human Genome Project, was really a really devout fundamentalist Christian, but he didn't see his study at odds with it because he thought that this process and that the way that we're built is an evidence of design, and that it, in essence, it's a gift, and our ability to understand it is a gift. So evolution isn't fundamentally at odds with religion. You can believe both. And so I think it's important for kids to understand evolution, period, and where they place that understanding in their lives or the framework of their worldview is a totally different part of this process. But I think just understanding how it works is really important, because our understanding of evolution and evolutionary biology kind of underpins a lot of what we know about our planet. So it's kind of good not to be completely in the dark about it.
I had not thought about this until we started talking, but I think so I would say of all the topics we've discussed with Reader and Go, this is one of the ones that has come up most naturally.
Cool.
Because I think,
that's true.
I think kids are just inherently interested in how things come to be, or maybe not all, but I feel like a lot of the sort of science-based questions that I've gotten from the kids do kind of come down to, well, how did this thing end up happening?
Yeah, origins, like star formation too. Like,
well, that's what I was going to say.
Origins of everything.
I was going to say it's the most, but I'm like, no, I think it's sort of in line with star formation. I feel like of the questions I've gotten,
especially with Go.
Oh my, yeah, endless.
Mr. Cosmology.
Yeah, but it's like, how are stars formed? Or how was this animal? Or how were we? Or, some other thing in the natural world formed. So I would say those are the two things that have come up the most. And given my understanding of, the formation of planets and stuff, I'm usually saying, just go ask Pops.
Thanks.
I'm not going to give you a satisfying answer. But at least on a kid's level, I feel pretty comfortable talking about evolution. So
Right. But oddly, we have found it's hard to find satisfying kids' books on evolution that don't dumb it down or like skip important parts. Because I don't know about everybody else's kids, but like you said, our kids are really curious and they like having like a good answer, not just one that is sufficient to make a kid stop asking questions incessantly, but like a good answer. And so it's hard to find that sort of stuff. And so I don't know if it's impossible. If anybody knows of any good books on evolution, we've looked, but if anybody knows of any books on evolution they've been reading to their kids that they really, really like, please send us an email because we would love to see them.
Well, so this is something I want to talk about, but let's take a pause. Do you remember how you first learned about evolution?
No, probably National Geographic magazine, because that's just like OG baller scientific magazine. And one of the things that I looked forward to us receiving in the mail as a kid through the 80s, Alvin, the submersible robot exploring, deep waters, or learning about plate tectonics, learning how the AIDS virus worked, learning about Chernobyl, all this sort of stuff, right? Voyager probe. It just sparked my curiosity in general. And I'm quite certain that at some point, that is where I first was exposed to the idea of evolution as a capital T theory.
Did your grade school or high school teach it at all?
Oh, of course.
At what level did you start learning about it?
I don't remember exactly. I know that obviously it was something that happened that is like, it's thrown out as just something that's an assumption in high school. Like I went to a private East Coast, non-religious, secular high school. And so, it wasn't a topic of contention. So I know some people, for some of our listeners, they live in places where it could be. So I can only speak for myself, but in high school, it was just assumed. I would imagine that we got into it more in middle school, but I don't know why it can't be taught to little kids. It should be taught to little kids. It's really cool. And there's a lot of evidence for it that's right at our fingertips. And it's super awesome.
Yeah. So I can't remember. I don't know if it was ever taught at my school. It's certainly, the neighborhood I grew up in was, I don't know if you'd call it progressive, but it certainly wasn't the type of neighborhood where there would have been issues.
Oh, no.
Teaching evolution.
No, not at all.
But I truly just have no recollection whether it was. I actually think, so I know at one point my mom was teaching, and when she was teaching the essay, I feel like she might have taught an essay that dealt with evolution, because I know she was sort of interested in it for a while. She's somebody who's quite interested in Lamarck, who actually kind of challenged Darwin's theories. But I remember her talking about that. And then I loved the play Inherit the Wind, which is about the Scopes trial, the monkey trial, where a teacher taught evolution. And there's weird things about the trial. It was, it went down in real life a little bit different than it went down in the play, but they made a great movie of it with Spencer Tracy.
Yes.
Playing one of the lawyers that I just loved and watched a lot. And that was probably where I got most interested in it. So I believe in the actual Scopes trial, it was and I could be entirely wrong about this, but I believe it was a substitute who came in and specifically taught evolution to challenge the laws against it. But in the play, it's a teacher who just feels quite profoundly that it's something important for the kids to know, and there are all sorts of layers to it. But what I find so interesting about that play is that the lawyer who's defending the teacher who taught evolution, you find out, just like you were saying before, that he is probably a religious man as well, but is simply one who does not see evolution as a challenge to his religious belief. But I think that is probably what formed my best understanding of the theories as a kid, just because I was so taken with the stories.
Interesting.
But I do think the books are interesting. So I am interested in why it's so hard to find good materials for kids about evolution. I think
it makes no sense.
It's
not that hard to understand. Even at you say, okay, here's DNA, and then DNA has these little bits in it, and there are these things called alleles, and sometimes parts of alternative forms of a gene pop up where it could be a red one, it could be a blue one, or whatever. Like, it's just a variety, and then that happens, and sometimes the variety is so strong that creature lives longer, has more babies, and then its babies have that mutation. Kids can understand that, even like the age of 5. I don't understand why it's so hard to find kids' books. It's just like, come on.
Well, I think one of the issues is that for a long time, because there was some contention about teaching evolution, I think the major publishers were not making kids' books about it. Because I know...
But it's been a while since that's been the case. And unless you're publishing something through the Texas Board of Education or some crockery, then, you can find a publisher that'll publish a real but engaging and fun book about evolution for grade school kids.
I think you're underestimating that a little bit, because I know one of the books we have, Grandmother Fish, was actually, I got this certainly after Reader was born.
Right.
And it was done as I don't know if it was I don't think GoFundMe is the right term, but it was self-funded and published, where people donated to get it out because there weren't enough books about evolution. So I think this is a problem that has been an issue for a little bit longer than you would think.
That's disappointing.
But since then, there have been a couple of books. And I don't think it's totally accurate to say that the books are bad. But I am curious about what the books choose to cover. Because that book, Grandmother Fish, it's a very pretty book. I wouldn't say it's badly done. I also like The Story of Life. But
The Story of Life is cool.
What all the books that I have seen do is they tell the story of evolution. So they say, we started at these, tiny single-celled organisms, and then we developed into more complex organisms. And then, some developed legs and crawled up on land, and they became mammals and other things. And then that became apes. And then, apes divided, and eventually we got humans. So they tell that story, which is certainly important for kids to know. But it's exactly what you were talking about. I don't understand what they don't talk about is how that process works. They don't talk about natural selection and how you get those divisions and branches and development. And that, to me, is the most interesting part.
Right. That's the actual story.
Yeah. I got so frustrated with this. I even picked up this book, Evolution for Smart Kids, which is a part of a series called Future Geniuses. And it's a little bit, when I got it, it was already a little bit too young for Reader and Go. But I got it because I was looking about it online, and it actually seemed to cover natural selection a little bit more. So I was like, oh, at least it covers it. So I'm going to get this. But then I went, and the page where it shows natural selection.
Yep.
I'm going to try to describe this. So it shows its little single-celled organism is called
Mm-hmm.
Luca. So it says Luca's children were all almost exactly like him, and the sons of his sons were as well, even though not all were able to live long enough to reproduce again. And then it shows so Luca's a little blue circle with two eyes. And then it shows their two kids are little blue circles with two eyes. And then one has a kid who's slightly darker blue and has three eyes. And then it shows an arrow that says bad mutation. And then one of the other generations down the line has a kid who's yellow with two eyes. And there's an arrow that shows good mutation. And then that one reproduces more. But it doesn't, why is I'm like, this is ableist. Why is three eyes a bad mutation?
They're singling out the dark-skinned one. I have a lot of problems with this.
But it doesn't, it's so close.
Yeah,
but you have
I
to
don't get that.
You have to actually show what
it's all about the whole point of selection pressures is they're pressures. They're pressures from the organism's environment.
Yeah.
Various sorts, yes. But they don't come out of nowhere, and they're not some sort of value judgment that a mind exterior to the situation will look at and say, nope, that's bad. That makes no sense. That's disappointing.
Yeah.
You know what you could have done is you could say, okay, and then one was and all of a sudden, one of Luca's great-great-grandchildren one day was red. And that red one got more energy from the sun than the blue ones. So it was stronger, and it had more babies. And then more of its babies were also red. It doesn't you can dumb this down. No offense to little kids, but you can make this as simple as you need to. And you can still make it fun and engaging at a young age to actually teach kids more or less how the process starts. And you don't have to get into DNA, chromosomes, genes, and alleles to actually describe how this process happens over generations. Sorry. I got a little heated there.
No, I think it can. And it's why I find it so confusing.
Yeah.
So I actually think, based on our conversations with Reader and Go, the hardest thing about this for young kids is the expanse of time. Because I actually think for kids, imagining really long stretches of time is very difficult. Because the last time we really got into a deep discussion about this with Reader and Go, they were sort of talking about it like it was all happening in one generation. And we kept having to say, no, you don't go from ape to human in one generation. It takes so many generations and hundreds of years for these small changes.
Hundreds of years?
Well, it depends on how big I'm not talking about.
I understand. I know.
Depending on the level of mutation, right? So
right.
Millions of years for big changes. And for little kids, thinking even 5 years in advance is such a long time to them.
1 month it causes them to be inconsolable.
Yeah. So I think for adults to a certain extent, but certainly for kids, that has been the thing I have found most challenging, is just to get them to kind of internalize and sense the real huge millions of years.
Well, I've talked about geologic and cosmic time with them a bunch, because they do ask these big questions about Earth and our solar system and the cosmos at large. And you can't really talk about any of that unless you start to pull way back to really vast timescales that can only really exist in theory for minds like ours. We live such a short period of time relative to the universe that we don't have a frame of reference that's reasonable. We can look at it mathematically. We can try to picture things, envisioning things based on what we've seen from paleontology or astronomy, or even just illustrations that artists have made over time of these things, we really don't have a concept. And I don't think we really can have a concept like that. You might think, like, if you're a spiritualist, you want to get into woo and you can think about like all your past lives or whatever. But we really don't have a way of wrapping our heads around how enormously long these spans of time are. Like, you can think about this. Okay, so it takes millions of years for us to go from being many millions of years for us to go from being proto apes to, Homo sapiens. You think, oh, so what was like, what was something that happened, what we would consider to be a really long time ago? How about the creation? How about the building of the pyramids? Okay, that was like just a couple thousand years ago. You're looking at like what, 4,000-6,000 years ago? Like, then orders of magnitude beyond, like 1,000 times longer than that, to go from being proto apes to Homo sapiens. It boggles the mind. Like we just don't have the ability to wrap our heads around it. And I know I'm sort of planting a flag and making an absolute statement, but I really do not. I have never seen, let's just say, I have never seen a person convince me that they can actually properly, not theoretically, properly actually conceptualize that span of time. And so for little kids who have vast imaginations, I think it actually plays in their favor, because then you can just keep it all imaginative and you don't have to sort of break it down like you would in like a classroom setting, and then try to imagine it in some sort of more formalized way. You just say it's a really long time. Like, how long it took for you to wait from, when we knew we were going to go to the beach to when we actually left to go to the beach? Well, take that times a bazillion, and they'll be like, whoa, that's a long time. Yes, it is. I think you could just throw whatever number out there. But the important thing is that they know that it happens over more generations than they could ever reasonably count.
I think the other thing that's difficult is because it's sort of an interesting theory. In popular media, you see it presented badly so often.
Oh, yeah.
We were watching
The ladder of evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because we were watching Star Trek, which I love. It has been so fun.
Bring it. I am typically a Star Trek apologist, but this was not their best moment.
Yeah. I forget which episode it was, but there is a character.
Tom Paris.
Yes.
Tom Paris and the trans warp drive. He goes past warp, or goes to warp 10, and is omnipresent, sort of like the infinite improbability drive in Hitchhiker's Guide. And then he comes out of it, and all of a sudden he starts like evolving rapidly. And then at the end of it, he becomes this sort of like salamander thing, mates with Janeway, who also has this happen to her later in the episode for some unknown reason. And this is the quote unquote, as I was it Tuvok who said, this is the end. This is where evolution is going to take humanity. But without the selection pressures that would lead to that eventual form, it is not an eventual form. They will just get really old as they are and just die.
No, I mean, evolution doesn't have a plan for us.
No.
That's not what the theory says.
No.
It doesn't say, it's not like, who had the ideal forms? Was that Plato?
Platonic forms, yes,
yeah.
Correct.
It's not like there's some platonic ideal that we're heading towards. It has nothing to do with that. It's just organisms reacting to the pressures on them in the current moment, and certain characteristics in that environment are more beneficial. And so those tend to then populate through the species more quickly.
Yeah.
But there's no ideal. Like, if that creature was taken out of that environment and put in a different environment, totally different things would become advantageous.
Oh, you mean like having 3 eyes could be a good thing?
Yeah, exactly.
3 eyes is bad.
Why? Because it looks
Except,
weird.
yeah, exactly. Oh my
But
God.
so we're watching it, and I'm like, guys, just so you know, that's not how evolution works.
Now, okay, I'm going to back up a second because I was saying before about long spans of time and these changes have to happen over long. That's not all evolution, not all like discernible changes in an organism happen over long spans of time. We can observe evolution happening in a laboratory setting, provided that we use organisms that gestate rapidly enough, like fruit
Mm-hmm.
flies or whatever, because then you can see generations succeed each other in a rapid fashion, and you can see when a speciation point happens. Like this is something you can see in a laboratory. I know creationists will say, but it's not enough. That's microevolution. That's not macroevolution. I'm just going to channel my Roy Kent and just exhale loudly. It's all the same. It's a process and it's built upon itself. And over time, big things spring out of small things. And eventually, lots of little changes lead to enough of a change that it is now wholly a different species, how we would classify a species, and perhaps not even able to mate with what came before it. It's a thing that happens, and we see all sorts of evidence for it. And children should be made aware of that. They shouldn't be hidden from them.
Well, I think thinking about evolution makes me think a little bit about how science is taught in general to kids.
Sure.
And I do think this could have been very personal to me. So I always did well in science, but I was not a kid where that was my favorite subject. And I think for me, the reason I didn't get more engaged is, at least in my school system, the way science is typically taught is for younger kids. It's very focused on biology.
Okay.
And I think that's because, it's like animals and plants, and that's what they think little kids are into.
Right.
So, and you sort of learn about like photosynthesis, but it's very broad strokes. It's just like, plants take sun and carbon dioxide and they can, make oxygen. And that's how, and then you get into chemistry and then you get into physics. And if you're not, like, at least in my school, if you weren't in the more advanced classes, like, you would never get to physics. And
that's a shame.
Yeah. And to me, I actually thought I was going to major in physics. That did not happen. I loved physics. And the reason I loved physics is because it was the first science I got to where I was like, oh, this isn't just teaching me facts about things. This is teaching me why the things really work.
Yeah.
So like
I can see that.
You
sure.
learn biology first, and then you get to chemistry, which actually shows you like why some of those things happen. Like you can learn about photosynthesis.
I loved chemistry.
But it's not until you get to chemistry where like you actually understand why that process is happening. So that sort of starts to get you into actually understanding the why of things. And then you get to physics. And like, to me, physics is what like breaks down all the big whys of the universe. Like,
you can use physics in your daily life. I think there's something to that. Like it's how we engage with our natural world in like a really physical sense, like understanding forces and why things work the way they do, in motion, at rest, electrically, dealing with changes in temperature and pressure. These are things that you can use to navigate.
And so I think another reason it's taught in that order so often is that you need some pretty decent math to deal with a lot of the concepts in physics, at least the way it's taught. And so they start with what they think is going to be the most interesting to kids, and then they kind of wait until they have those math skills to get into those. But I would flip it, because I think you could find a way to teach the concepts of physics without the math. And like, since that's the building blocks of what a lot of the other things are based on, chemistry is about like molecules interacting in ways, and physics tells you why molecules do what they do. So I would flip it and go in the exact opposite direction and probably at least somewhat start science with some of the very basic concepts of physics. And
you can easily. You can do that. You can do that with physical demonstrations in a classroom or outside. There's so many different things you could do with a kid. I mean, if you think about what our kids have done at their school, they do, especially like we saw a reader go through this. They did do a physics module in, I think it was second grade, dealing with pulleys and levers and fulcrums, and understanding how you can game out a solution to a physical problem using some of those basic forces. It's just like roll a ball down a hill. Okay, this ball is less massive. This ball is more massive. Going down the hill, they gain the same amount, or sorry, they're like turning this change in gravitational potential energy into kinetic energy. Which one has more kinetic energy? Well, which one is more massive? Let's roll them into these box of block, or this like stack of blocks, and see which one knocks down more blocks, the heavy one or the light one. Oh, look, the heavy one did it. Why? Because it had more stuff in it. And all that stuff got pulled down, and altogether that stuff had more energy. Like, you could break it down in ways, just like with evolution, that kids can understand. And I don't get, and it could be totally different in other countries. And if anybody's listening, I mean, heaven forfend, we have listeners outside of, North America. We would love to hear your experiences in grade school and beyond when it came to your science, not even just evolution, but your science education and the order that you were taught things and what was prioritized, because that's super fascinating to us.
But I think science to me was most interesting when it gave me insight about the world. And even beyond that, sort of some tools to try to figure things out on my own.
Yeah.
In high school, I was real cool. So I went and did a physics camp all about the theory of relativity.
That's
and
awesome.
The awesome thing about a lot of what Einstein did is that a lot of what he figured out was done in what is called like his thought experiments. And they're things that they're definitely tricky and it can be kind of hard to work through them, but you can sit and sort of think through them and get to some of his same conclusions, even as like a high schooler without a lot of background. And it's so exciting to do that and to actually feel like you can figure out these things for yourself. And I think, to me, that's what's also exciting about evolution, because it takes this thing that we all sort of wonder about on some fundamental level, where we came from and how the world got to be where it is. And it gives you tools to think about it. I know the Atheist Experience, which is a show we've talked about before, one of their hosts, Forrest, I always forget his last name. Forrest Valkai. Is he an evolutionary biologist? He certainly knows a lot about evolution.
Yes, that is true. I think he could be. I'll look that up. You keep talking. I'll look it up really quick.
And he often fields a lot of the questions of religious people calling in and asking about evolution. And I was listening a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about something, and he said, oh, and like, this is why you see so many sort of illnesses and things happen later in life, because there is no evolutionary advantage to staying healthy late in life.
No.
Like, after you're through your childbearing years, there is no evolutionary advantage to health. Like, if you have had kids and stayed healthy enough to raise them, it doesn't matter if you get sick, because your genes have been passed down if you get sick later. And I was like, I had never thought about that. I was like, oh, this is so fascinating. This is like this whole new insight on life that I never have. I don't know what I'm going to apply that to, but I was like, this is so cool. This answers questions.
Yeah. No. Quickly, Forrest. He works as an anthropologist,
Hmm.
but he's done all sorts of science, chemistry and biology related videos earlier in his YouTube career, and apparently he has pet pigs.
Even better.
Even better.
Even
They're
better.
very clean, smart, loving animals.
But so I think it's a shame we don't focus on it more because to me, it gets into the fun of science, which is
Yeah.
just learning tools and doing that sort of interesting work of like seeing what you can apply and figure out on your own.
And you touched on something there, the idea of the thought experiments. I think that if we framed more more science education for kids in general, especially at an early age, in terms of thought experiments, because kids love to do imaginative processes. Like, okay, so picture this. Now picture this. Now, what if this happens? What do you think's going to happen? And you go around the room and they give all these answers. Some of them might actually get it right because if you frame it correctly and you put the steps in a coherent order, then it should lead the person to the conclusion that actually is the model that we use. Because the whole point of us having this model is because these things are demonstrable and repeatable in nature, not just in our imaginations, but our imaginations are fueled by what we experience. And so even as a young child, their basic experiences should yield something approximate to some of these models that the deeper definitions and explanations might be completely boring and out of their pay grade. I think it can be done and it should be done. Should we start a GoFundMe today?
For what?
A book series.
I do at some point.
Do you think we have enough subscribers yet?
No.
I think once we get to 50 subscribers, I think that we should go for it.
You think that's enough?
Those 50 subscribers will definitely help us make this entire long-running beloved book series that we will definitely make. Okay, maybe more than 50. Okay, we'll keep you guys posted.
Yeah. I have so many questions because I think, and I don't know if we're planning on talking about in this series, but there's the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
And that is another thing that definitely was taught in my school. But somehow it was never taught in a way that made it exciting.
That's not surprising.
I feel like
it's a shame. I mean, it can be like all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have the delivery doesn't have to be this dry presentation of facts that a kid has to memorize for a quiz. Like, how much more valuable is it to a kid who's, especially one who's curious, to be shown not just this is what this thing is, but show why it matters to that child's life and how that child can then use that information to better navigate their world. I mean, and maybe even just maybe raise children who understand it even better than they do. Sky's the limit.
Well, I feel like a lot of religious and even sort of non-religious criticism of science and non-belief of science comes from this perspective that scientists are somehow trying to hoodwink people.
Yeah, because vast conspiracy.
Yeah, because they just want to be right or they don't want to be challenged or I don't even know.
They don't like grant money and they don't like to have their names associated with great discoveries. That's what scientists definitely don't want. They definitely don't. I'm being totally sarcastic, by the way. They definitely don't want to have their name attached to a finding, a new theory, a new model that completely upends our existing understanding. They definitely don't want that, but they actually do. And they would go out of their way to challenge each other to make sure that the best possible method, the best possible model stands out and is used. That's the whole point. But and anybody like the flat earth thing, like, come on, please.
Yeah, well, yeah. But on a whole different level, I've had the pleasure of working with some scientists and also just people I've studied under, I feel like the higher up in science you get, the particularly in people who are sort of more doing research and are the ones trying to make those new discoveries, those people, not always, certainly, they're like, no.
They're people.
They're people. But the kind of joy and playfulness with which a lot of the people I've met approach their work.
It's childlike. Look at Neil deGrasse Tyson, for the love of God. Like, it's a childlike sense of wonder that they approach their work with. I mean, and this goes for anything. Like, if you don't have that sense of wonder and joy in what you do, maybe you look for something new. But yes.
But I feel like it's shame
not dry.
That more people don't get to experience that in their study of science. Because I think I just don't think it's captured well.
Well, it's like we were talking about last week. It's like it takes the right kind of person, not necessarily what they do, but it takes the right kind of person to communicate some of these things. That's why not all great scientists are science educators. That's why it takes somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Forrest Falkai to stand out as a science educator, because, communication it's a skill, and it's not necessarily one that you can learn. Sometimes it's part of who you are.
Yeah.
So we need to find the people to do this, I think, is what it comes down to. And if we haven't found them yet, I think we already have. I think that we just need to help popularize what they do more. Because there are plenty of people out there that do not just agree with us, but they've been doing what we want them to do already. But it's just that the rest of society is not catching up to our satisfaction, perhaps. There are people that have been doing this longer than I've been aware of the need for this. I humbly admit that I am late to the party. I'm not out here on like the bleeding edge of early childhood education or some nonsense. But as a dad with 2 kids, I became painfully aware that this sort of stuff not only matters, but it's sometimes really lacking. So that's what it took for me. What will it take for you? I don't know. But I think that we kind of have to stand together if this whole, increasing secularization of society is to be as fruitful as it could be. Because this is part of it, is, not being precious about what we believe, changing what we understand about the world as, new, better models arise, but then not kicking the current models to the curb just because they hurt our feelings. And, that's all I'm going to say about that without becoming a jerk.
Yeah. I don't think we have time, but I do wonder, like you said earlier, why evolution is such a scary sticking point for some religious people.
Well, we know why. Because if you take a religious book and its stories, its origins, literally, then it's a literal the literal origins of life in that book are probably not going to have anything to do with allele change, like changes in allele frequency over time. Because we didn't know what DNA or chromosomes or genes or alleles were. We didn't understand the process of successive generations, being affected by selection pressures. We didn't understand that. And so what did we have? We had mudmen, and we had, the whims of gods, and they're good stories. And if you can take a lot of stuff in those books as allegories and still have no problem with the process of evolution and be a better scientist at it than I will ever be. It's not necessarily about your religious beliefs. It's maybe, I don't want to say severity, but rigidity, perhaps. Literalism is maybe a better way of looking at it. And creationism trying to say, that it's religion and science, and it's like they want to play too, but they want to bring their own ball, and they bring like a billiards cue ball to a soccer game and say, no, we're going to play with this. This is cool. And everybody else is like, this is not a soccer ball. Like they want to be able to play, but they want to play by their own rules, and they want everybody else to play by their rules too. but I just think it's a defensive mechanism, and obviously it's something that will continue to happen over history. I mean, look at poor Galileo. There are so many instances over time that we've seen, so many that we already know about so publicly, historically, and otherwise, that we can point to and say, yeah, some versions of religiosity are specifically anti-science and hold us back from a brighter future that actually can positively affect all of us, regardless of whatever your religious beliefs are.
I also think totally separate from religion, and something I think a lot about sort of what people get hung up in religion is just stuff that bothers them regardless. And so then they use religion to make that an issue. But when I've heard some people who are really vehement about this talk, I feel like there is for some people, like almost being offended or like an ick factor that they might have evolved from an animal.
I have talked to more of those than I can count. Yes.
And I don't get that either. Like, I don't know.
Because
that's fascinating to me.
Because some religious texts have mankind as a creation of God, elevated above all other creatures. Again, not the people writing the books not fully understanding the process of evolution and the history of our planet. And so because of that, mankind is elevated above all other creatures. So the mere thought that we would be a great ape, one of several great apes, is anathema. It's disgusting. It's abhorrent. They can't. No way. They can't do that. Don't touch my brain with that thought. I totally get it. I completely understand why they would do that, because that's what they've been taught. And I don't blame them. They're victims when it comes to this sort of thing. And I try not to pity people who think that sort of thing. But at the same time, I do have to guard against that, because it's kind of where I go, is like, I really wish that you could see how beautiful the process of evolution and our understanding of it really is, and all the different ways that it actually really benefits us. And this, what we understand about the evolutionary process and how we can then manipulate that in the lab for food sources or in virology, all sorts of different ways. It's really cool. Like, think about, like, there's that meme about like two wolves, and they say, oh, look, there's some humans over there by a campfire. They have food. It smells good. Yeah, let's go over and see what's up with them. What could go wrong? And then the next picture is like chihuahuas in tutus, because that's what we did with genetics and our understanding of selection pressures, artificial in this case, over time, making all sorts of different weird ass dog breeds. Yes, it took a while, but we have had dogs domesticated for what, like 10, 12,000 years. That's how long it takes to give us cockapoos.
Yep.
But I think we've sort of beaten this one to death, but it is so fascinating. And I would love to hear, we've asked a lot of questions to the audience in this one, and I would love to hear some feedback regarding some of that, especially from people overseas who might have had different educational experience from us. So great. We would always love to hear from you.
Yeah. And as always, we have to thank First Frame Music and Jonathan Zalbin for the music for the show.
And that wraps up this episode of Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.